In the quiet town of Blackwood Falls, Louisiana, there stood a house no one dared to touch. It had no address, no history on record, and yet everyone knew it. The locals called it the Blood House. It was infamous for one simple reason. Every family who ever lived there either vanished without a trace or died screaming within its walls. One rainy evening in New York, a struggling documentary filmmaker named Ethan Carter received a letter. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded. It read, "You are the last surviving heir." The letter detailed an inheritance from a grandmother he had never even met. The property, a massive old southern mansion in Blackwood Falls. For Ethan, this wasn't just a house. It was the perfect subject for his next horror documentary. A real-life haunted house with a dark, terrifying legend. It was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Ignoring the warnings from friends and the unsettling feeling in his gut, Ethan packed his bags and drove south. The moment he crossed the town line into Blackwood Falls, the air changed. It became heavy, thick, almost suffocating, as if breathing suddenly required effort. He pulled into a dusty old gas station to ask for directions. When he mentioned the house, the old man behind the counter froze, his eyes widening with genuine fear. "That house," the man whispered, his voice trembling. "It feeds on souls. It doesn't let people leave. Not whole, anyway." Ethan just laughed, dismissing it as local superstition. That was his first mistake. The house was even more imposing in person. Gnarled trees choked the yard, and the windows looked like vacant eyes staring out at the world. Stepping inside, a wave of cold air washed over him, far colder than the Louisiana heat he'd just left behind. None of the light switches worked. The house was a tomb of darkness, but strangely, in the center of the vast living room floor, someone had already placed candles in a perfect circle. They were unlit, waiting. That night, as Ethan tried to sleep, he was disturbed by a persistent scratching sound coming from beneath the floorboards. It was rhythmic, like claws scraping against wood. Unable to ignore it, he got up. The clock on his phone read 2:13 a.m. He found a loose plank in the hallway and, with a grunt of effort, pried it open. There, nestled in the dirt below, was a leather-bound book. The cover felt oddly warm, and it was stained with what looked like dried blood. Carved into the leather with what appeared to be bone were the words, "The Covenant of the Black Father." His heart pounding, Ethan opened the book. The pages were filled with rituals of forbidden black magic, spells for binding souls to physical objects, instructions for blood offerings, incantations for resurrecting the dead, and page after page of curses written in a language he couldn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar. He flipped to the very last page, where a single, chilling sentence was scrawled in fresh ink. "Once opened, the house awakens." At that exact moment, the lights throughout the house flickered on and then off, plunging him back into darkness. Something had noticed him. Sleep offered no escape. That night, Ethan dreamed he was paralyzed in his bed, watching a horned shadow grow in the corner of the room. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it loomed over him. It spoke, but its mouth never moved. The voice echoed directly inside his mind. "I have kept your bloodline alive for this moment," it hissed. Ethan woke up screaming, his body drenched in cold sweat. His nose was bleeding, dripping crimson onto the sheets. He stumbled out of bed and, drawn by an unseen force, went down to the basement. There, freshly carved into the stone walls, were symbols. The exact same symbols he had just seen in his dream. The terrifying truth crashed down on him. The book wasn't just a collection of old stories. The rituals weren't meant to be read, they were meant to be continued. The house didn't just haunt people at random, it selected them, it curated its own bloodline. He wasn't an heir to a property, he was an heir to a curse. The house needed a new caretaker, a new family member to perform the rituals and feed its ancient hunger. Ethan wasn't there to make a documentary. He had been brought there to make the next offering, and the house was getting hungry. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. The next day, a knock echoed through the quiet house. It was a woman named Martha, his new neighbor, but something was terribly wrong with her. Her eyes were voids, completely black, pools of unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light. She spoke in a low, gravelly voice, her words chilling Ethan to the bone. "The house demands payment," she warned. "Blood for protection, souls for power." As if to prove her point, she lifted the sleeve of her blouse. Her arm was a grotesque patchwork, stitched together crudely, the skin puckered and discolored. "We all paid," she said, a strange, horrifying smile stretching her lips. Her teeth, he noticed, with a jolt of terror, were filed to sharp points. "Some of us still live." And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. One moment she was there, a solid, terrifying presence on his porch. The next, she was gone, leaving only the scent of dust and decay in the air. Panic seized Ethan. He had to get out. He ran to his car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He sped down the driveway, tires spitting gravel, not caring which direction he went, as long as it was away from that house. But every road he took, every turn he made, somehow looped back, depositing him right in front of the cursed property. It was impossible, a nightmare of twisted geography. He tried his phone, desperate for a connection, for a lifeline to the outside world. No signal, just a dead, mocking scream. Defeated, he stumbled back inside, the house feeling more like a prison than ever. Back in the living room, the book lay open on the floor, as if waiting for him. But it wasn't how he'd left it. The ink on the pages seemed to move, writhing like living veins, pulsing with a faint, dark light. One particular ritual glowed with a malevolent red hue. The words burned into his mind. To escape, offer another. As he read, the house itself began to transform. The walls seemed to pulse, a slow, rhythmic beat like a monstrous heart. The floorboards under his feet felt soft, as if they were breathing. And then the whispers started. They came from everywhere and nowhere at once, slithering into his ears, filling every room. Blood remembers. Blood obeys. The voices were ancient, hungry. That night, as Ethan sat huddled in a corner, paralyzed by fear, a stray dog wandered into the yard. It was a scruffy, friendly-looking thing, its tail wagging tentatively. The glowing words from the book echoed in his mind. Offer another. A terrible, desperate idea took root. He could escape. He could be free. With tears streaming down his face, he lured the dog inside. He didn't want to do it. Every fiber of his being screamed against it. But the whispers were getting louder. The house was closing in, and his will was not his own. He completed the ritual, his hands slick with a warmth that wasn't his. But the screams that followed weren't from the dog. They were high-pitched, human-sounding shrieks that erupted from inside the very walls of the house, a chorus of agony that seemed to last an eternity. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for any explanation that could make sense of the madness, Ethan found himself drawn to the basement. The air was cold, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sweet. He stood before the large, ornate mirror that his grandmother had always kept covered. He hesitated, then pulled the dusty sheet away. His own reflection stared back, pale and haunted. But he wasn't alone. A figure stood behind him. It was his grandmother, but not the woman he remembered. Her skin hung loosely from her bones. Her eyes burned with an internal, hellish fire. Her voice was a dry, raspy rasp, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "We serve the Black Father," she croaked. "Every generation must feed him." Then, in a truly grotesque display, she began to peel her own skin away, like pulling off a loose garment. Underneath, there was nothing human left, only a writhing mass of shadows and sinew. "If you don't continue," the creature that was once his grandmother hissed, "the house will take you instead." The horrifying truth crashed down on him. This wasn't a one-time event. The curse never ended. It only changed owners. He was the next link in a chain of damnation. Suddenly, the distant sound of police sirens cut through the night. He remembered reading about some tourists who had gone missing nearby. Had they strayed too close? Had they become another offering? He was standing in the center of the ritual circle, the ceremonial knife still clutched in his hand. He had a choice: escape, but at the cost of innocent blood, condemning some other poor soul to this fate, or refuse, and become another one of the house's eternal prisoners, another screaming face in the walls. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of pleas and commands. The walls themselves began to warp and shift, forming the tormented faces of past victims. their mouths open in silent, unending screams. With a final, shuddering breath, Ethan stepped fully into the circle. He raised the knife. Blood dripped onto the ancient sigils. The house didn't just whisper anymore. It screamed, a sound of pure ecstatic pleasure that shook the very foundations of the world. Weeks later, a new family came to tour the house. The real estate agent greeted them at the door, her smile unnaturally wide, stretching too far across her face. They marveled at the old-world charm, the spacious rooms, the surprisingly low price. As they descended into the basement to look at the storage space, they passed by the large, ornate mirror. For a fleeting second, the young couple thought they saw a third reflection standing with them, a pale, terrified man, his mouth open in a scream they couldn't hear, but it was gone in an instant. Down in the darkness, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, the ancient book slowly creaked open. On its final page, a fresh splash of red appeared, forming new words. The covenant continues, and somewhere in the quiet, forgotten town of Blackwood Falls, a child was born. It had its mother's smile, its father's laugh, and a pair of familiar, haunted brown eyes. Ethan's eyes